A billionaire CEO sees two black twins sell a toy car to save their mother. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. Their lives will never be the same. Please, ma'am, only $10. It's the fastest car you've ever seen. 8-year-old Maya's voice shook as she held the small red Camaro, her dirty hands a stark contrast to the shine of the toy she and her twin sister Zoe were tending as if it were made of gold. It was a cold December morning in Central Park, and the girls had been there for three. A billionaire CEO sees two black twins sell a toy car to save their mother. Their lives will never be the same. Please, ma'am, only $10. It's the fastest car you've ever seen. 8-year-old Maya's voice shook as she held the small red Camaro, her dirty hands a stark contrast to the shine of the toy she and her twin sister Zoe were tending as if it were made of gold. It was a cold December morning in Central Park, and the girls had been there for 3 hours. Their tattered coats barely protected them from the biting wind, but they stood firm on the sidewalk, making the same desperate plea to every passerby. "Mommy needs her meds today," Zoe whispered to her sister, wiping away a tear that refused to stay on her cheek. "If we don't make money—" Across the street, Blake Morrison adjusted his $3,000 jacket and watched with growing discomfort. At 42, the CEO of Morrison Enterprises had built a billion-dollar tech empire, but he'd never seen anything so touching as two children desperately trying to save their mother. "Mr. Morrison, your car is waiting," his assistant, Marcus, muttered, checking the Rolex on his wrist. "The meeting with the Japanese investors starts in 20 minutes. Blake waved his hand absently, unable to tear his eyes away from the twins. There was something in their determination, the way they supported each other, that touched a part of him he had buried years ago. "Excuse me, sir, but this stroller is very special," Maya explained to the man in the suit, who was completely ignoring her, talking on the phone. "It belonged to our father before he—" The man walked past them as if the girls were invisible. Zoe squeezed her sister's hand. "Let's try this a little longer. Mom is counting on us." Blake watched for another 5 minutes, seeing at least a dozen people turn the girls away. Some with barely concealed disdain, others simply pretending they didn't exist. What impressed him most was not the refusal, but the unwavering dignity with which the twins responded to each no. "Marcus," Blake said suddenly, "cancel the meeting." "Sir?" The assistant blinked, confused. "These are $50 million investors." "You heard me." Blake crossed the street with determined strides, his Italian boots clicking crisply on the wet pavement. The twins saw him approaching and exchanged trusting glances. Maya lifted the stroller with both hands as if it were a precious offering. "What makes this stroller so special?" Blake asked, crouching down to be level with the girls. Zoe swallowed. "It was the last gift our daddy gave us before he went to heaven. Mama said that sometimes we have to sacrifice the things we love to save the ones we love even more." Blake felt something tighten in his chest. "Is your mother sick?" "She has diabetes," Maya replied, her voice quiet but determined. "The medication is $200, and our last dose ends today. If she doesn't take it—" The sentence hung in the air, but the weight of what was left unsaid was deafening. Blake looked at the stroller in Maya's shaking hands. It was an older model, well-preserved, but clearly well-loved. It had scratches from years of play, but every part was clean and polished. $200, he repeated thoughtfully. To him, it was less than the cost of a meal at his favorite restaurants. Maya nodded vigorously. "The drugstore said they could only wait until 5 months. After that—" She couldn't finish. Blake pulled out his wallet, and the twins stared at it, wide-eyed. He carefully counted out $500 and handed it to Maya. "But the stroller was only $10, Zoe protested, confused. "To you, maybe. To me, it's worth a lot more." Blake took the stroller from Maya's hands, feeling the weight of their decision in something he himself couldn't yet understand. The girls looked at each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. "Thank you, sir. Thank you," they said in unison, clutching the money to their chests. As the twins ran toward the drugstore, Blake stood motionless, holding the little red Camaro. A strange feeling came over him, as if this chance meeting was just the first act of something much larger that was about to unfold. Marcus approached, clearly upset. "Mr. Morrison, The Japanese investors are extremely disappointed. Keep an eye on those girls, Blake interrupted, slipping a toy car discreetly into his jacket pocket. I want to know where they live. Sir? Blake watched the twins disappear around the corner. A strange sense of purpose came over him. There was something about those two kids that awakened a part of him that he thought was dead forever. You heard me. What about Marcus? Blake turned to his assistant, his eyes shining with an intensity he had never seen before. I have a feeling this story is just beginning. If you like this story, be sure to subscribe, because what happens next will change the lives of everyone involved in ways no one could have predicted. Marcus returned 2 hours later with information that made Blake's fist clench. The twins lived in a rundown apartment complex on the south side where the elevator had been out of order for 6 months, forcing the families to climb 10 flights of stairs in the dark. Their mother's name is Diana Foster, Marcus reported, referring to his notes. A registered nurse for 15 years. She was fired from St. Mary's 3 weeks ago for alleged professional incompetence. Blake raised an eyebrow. Incompetence? A nurse for 15 years? That's what the official report said, but I've been quietly talking to some of the cleaning staff. Marcus hesitated. Sir, the real reason is that she publicly questioned why black patients were given less pain medication than white patients for the same procedures. The silence in Blake's office was deafening. He swiveled his chair looking out the picture window, which afforded a privileged view of Manhattan. Below, tiny people hurried, each fighting their own invisible battles. Go on, Blake said, his voice growing quieter. Dr. Patricia Whitman, the head of the department, claimed that Diana was creating unnecessary tension and challenging established protocols. Diana was fired on the spot. Marcus glanced at another page. No warning, no severance, and since she was fired for misconduct, she is not eligible for unemployment benefits. Blake held up the red typewriter, running his thumb over its scuffed surface. And the girls, they go to Jefferson Elementary. Excellent grades, never missed a day of school until this week. The principal said they were the most dedicated students she had ever seen, but they stopped coming when their mother got sick. The door to the office swung open silently. Sarah Chun, Morrison Enterprises Director of Human Resources, and Blake's personal friend for over a decade, walked in unannounced, a privilege few enjoyed. Blake, I need to talk to you about something urgent, she said, noticing the tension in the room. It's about St. Mary's. Blake and Marcus exchanged meaningful glances. What an interesting coincidence. What did you find out? Sarah sat up, opening her tablet. Remember when you asked me to look into investment opportunities in healthcare? Well, St. Mary's is desperately seeking a lead investor. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. And why is it urgent? Blake asked, though he already knew the answer. Because they received a preliminary offer from Hartwell Medical Group this morning. If the merger goes through, half the staff will be laid off, and administrative protocols will become, shall we say, even stricter when it comes to diversity issues. Blake smiled, not the polite smile he wore in business meetings, but something sharper, more dangerous. Marcus, I want you to cancel all my meetings for tomorrow. Sarah, I need a full report on St. Mary's financial position in 2 hours. Blake, Sarah said carefully, what are you thinking exactly? Doing what's right, and maybe teaching a few people a lesson about the consequences of their choices. That day, Blake did something he hadn't done in years. He left the office without telling Marcus and drove to the south side. The contrast was startling. In 20 minutes, he'd gone from glittering skyscrapers to buildings with peeling brick and boarded-up windows. He found Diana Foster at a small corner grocery store, haggling with the cashier over the price of a can of soup. She was younger than Blake had imagined, maybe 35, with the same quiet determination he'd seen in her daughters. Mrs. Foster, Blake approached quietly. Diana turned, recognizing him immediately. Her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment. Sir, my daughters told me what you did. I can't thank you enough. Can I buy you some coffee? I'd like to talk. At a small cafe next door, Diana told him her story. 15 years devoted to St. Mary's, night shifts, double shifts. Patients who sought her out because they trusted her care. Dr. Whitman always treated me differently, Diana explained, stirring her coffee with hands that shook slightly. a side effect of the medications she used sparingly. But when I started asking questions about why the pain protocol was different depending on the patient's profile, everything changed. Did you document these differences? Diana smiled. Sir, I've been a nurse for 15 years. I document everything. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket. Dates, names, dosages, protocols, everything she'd seen over the years. Blake looked down at the notebook, his eyes shining with an intensity that Diana couldn't quite interpret. Miss Foster, can I ask you a question? If you had the chance to return to the hospital under better circumstances, would you? In a heartbeat, Diana answered without hesitation. These patients are my family. They deserve to be cared for, no matter who they are or where they come from. Blake nodded, the solution crystallizing in his mind. What if I told you that this might be possible? That night, Blake worked late, making calls to contacts in New York, Washington, and London. The red typewriter remained on his desk, a constant reminder of the reasons for his actions. Sarah walked into the office at 11 p.m. to find Blake still poring over financial statements and legal documents. You're planning on buying the entire hospital, aren't you? She asked sharply. Blake looked up, his smile filled with a determination she hadn't seen in a long time. Sarah, remember why we got into this business? It wasn't just for the money. We wanted to prove we could make a difference, she finished, understanding immediately. That's right, and now we have a chance to do just that. Blake leaned back in his chair. St. Mary's needed $15 million to stay in business. Hartwell wanted to buy it for $5 million and fire half the staff. What about you? Blake held the golf cart, his eyes fixed on the city lights below. I'm going to offer $20 million with some very specific stipulations regarding personnel policies and medical care protocols. Sarah smiled. Dr. Whitman won't like it. She won't, Blake agreed, his voice full of silent promise. But I have a feeling she'll realize that underestimating people can be a very costly mistake. Blake tucked the card into his pocket, exactly where it had been since that morning in the park. In the space of 24 hours, this little toy had become the catalyst for something much bigger. A chain of events that would prove that sometimes justice comes in unexpected ways. As the city lights twinkled like the stars on Earth, Blake put the finishing touches on a plan that would do far more than help his family. But neither Diana nor the arrogant Dr. Whitman could have imagined that this quiet, generous man had the resources to completely rewrite the rules of the game and would not hesitate to use them when justice was at stake. The boardroom at St. Mary's had never hosted such a tense audience. On one side of the mahogany table, Dr. Patricia Whitman nervously adjusted her glasses, surrounded by board members who seemed to share her growing anxiety. On the other side, Blake Morrison sat quietly, a black briefcase in front of him. Morrison, Dr. Whitman began in her most authoritative voice, we appreciate your interest in our hospital, but our partnership with Hartwell Medical is all but over. Hartwell withdrew their offer this morning after discovering some discrepancies in your administrative records, Blake interrupted quietly, sliding a document across the table. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Hamilton, the chief financial officer, glanced quickly at the document, his eyes widening. How do you know that? Blake smiled, the smile his competitors had learned to fear. Let's just say that when you're moving $20 million in the financial markets, people take notice. And when those people discover questionable hiring and firing practices, well, he paused for effect, let's just say Hartwell chose to focus on less challenging options. Dr. Whitman tried to remain calm, but her hands were shaking slightly. Sir, I don't understand why a man of your resources would be interested in a local hospital like ours. Oh, but I have a very personal interest, Blake replied, opening his briefcase, particularly in matters related to workplace equity and adherence to fair healthcare protocols. He pulled a small red typewriter from his briefcase, placing it carefully on the table. Dr. Whitman frowned, confused by the baby item among the legal papers. That stroller, Blake explained calmly, belonged to two extraordinary girls, Maya and Zoe Foster, the daughters of Diane Foster, a nurse who has worked here with exemplary dedication for 15 years. The name hit Dr. Whitman like a gunshot. Her face instantly paled. Sir, if this is about that problematic employee... Problematic, Blake repeated, his voice conversational, but with a coldness that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. Let's be specific about who the problematic employee is. Blake pulled another document from his briefcase. Independent audit of pain medication practices over the past 5 years. We found some interesting patterns. He ran his finger over the numbers. African American patients consistently receive 40% less pain medication than white patients for identical procedures. Dr. Whitman protested. These numbers could be explained by… What? Blake asked, rising slowly. Imaginary genetic differences in pain perception. Because that's what you told Diane Foster when she questioned these methods, isn't it? The room was dead silent. Blake continued, pulling out more papers. An audio recording of the meeting where you fired Diane Foster. Legal in New York State because one of the parties, in this case Diane, consented to the recording. He placed a small tape recorder on the table. I'd like to hear her explain again why some people tend to exaggerate their pain symptoms. Dr. Whitman was clearly desperate now. Sir, you can't just buy a hospital. Of course I can, Blake smiled again. And I already have. The papers were signed this morning. St. Mary's is now part of the Morrison Foundation for Health Equity. Dr. Hamilton swallowed hard. What does that mean for the current staff? That's an excellent question, Blake replied, sitting back down. Most of the staff will be retained, with significant pay increases and improved benefits. The nursing staff, in particular, will be properly recognized and compensated for their years of exceptional service. He paused, his gaze fixed on Dr. Whitman. However, certain members of the administration will be terminated immediately, particularly those whose discriminatory actions created a hostile work environment and compromised the quality of care. Dr. Whitman finally exploded. You can't do that. I have a 20-year medical career, contacts all over town. Indeed, Blake corrected gently. Sarah Chun, our Director of Human Resources, spent the morning talking to hospital administrators within a 500-meter radius. It's interesting that when you share records of discriminatory practices and medical audit data, employment opportunities become limited. At that moment, the conference room door swung open. Diana Foster walked in, immaculately dressed, followed by twins Maya and Zoe, who rushed to Blake. Mr. Morrison, Maya exclaimed, hugging his leg. Mom said you did something amazing. Blake leaned over, handing Zoe's red car back. It's hers. I was just holding it for her. Zoe clutched the car to her chest, tears of joy streaming down her face. Thank you for taking care of her and Mom. Diana walked up to the desk, her posture straight and professional. Dr. Whitman, she said calmly, I came to get my things from my locker before I start my new position. New position? Dr. Whitman asked, still in shock. Blake smiled, hugging the twins. Diana Foster is our new director of nursing. Her first project was to implement equitable pain management protocols and conduct a cultural sensitivity training program for the entire medical staff. The transformation in the room was palpable. The board members who had supported Dr. Whitman's methods now avoided eye contact, aware that the wind had completely changed direction. This is a conspiracy, Dr. Whitman muttered, gathering her things with shaking hands. You planned this from the beginning. Diana turned to her, her voice calm but firm. We didn't plan anything. We simply documented the truth and found someone willing to listen. Blake stood, extending his hand to Diana. Welcome back to work, Director Foster. As Dr. Whitman hurried out of the room, followed by the thoughtful council members, Maya tugged at the sleeve of Blake's jacket. Mr. Morrison, why did you help us? You didn't even know us. Blake knelt again, looking into the twins' bright eyes. Sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we meet at the most unexpected times. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What? Zoe asked curiously. That doing the right thing is worth more than any business meeting, Blake replied, his voice filled with genuine emotion. Diana watched the interaction, knowing that this powerful man had changed her daughters as much as he had changed their lives. But as Dr. Whitman found her professional bridges burned across the region, and Blake found his new, unexpected family, one question remained. How did the sale of a simple toy car orchestrate a complete revolution in the lives of so many? The answer would show that sometimes justice comes from the smallest, most unexpected gestures. 6 months later, St. Mary's was unrecognizable. Diana Foster walked the halls, proudly pinning her director of nursing badge to her white coat. Her reforms had changed not only medical protocols, but the entire institutional culture. Mom! Maya and Zoe ran down the hall, their school backpacks swinging. Mrs. Johnson said we're going to present our project on real-life heroes to the whole school. Diana smiled, hugging her daughters, who were now wearing new uniforms for the first time in years. Who are you doing your project on? Across town, former Dr. Patricia Whitman was furiously typing another cover letter in her small rented apartment. Her once perfect resume now bore the toxic stain of her discriminatory practices. The phone rang, another rejection, the 12th in 3 weeks. I'm sorry, Dr. Whitman, but your previous references raise concerns about cultural fit. Patricia abruptly hung up. Her luxury home had been sold to pay for a lawsuit she'd lost before it even began. Her former colleagues were avoiding her calls, and a 20-year career had evaporated in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, Blake arrived at the hospital for his weekly visit, a tradition he'd begun after acquiring it. This wasn't just an administrative checkup, but his way of connecting with the family the toy car had brought into his life. Mr. Morrison. The twins rushed to hug him, followed by Diana. We've had 0 complaints of unequal treatment this month, Diana said proudly. Our team received unanimous approval from the State Medical Review Board. Dr. Hamilton, who was still at the hospital, approached hesitantly. Mr. Morrison, I want you to know that I've been wrong about everything. Working under Director Foster, I've learned more about humanized medicine in 6 months than I have in my entire 20-year career. Diana put her hand on her colleague's shoulder. The important thing is that we're building something better together. Later, in his office at the hospital, Blake reviewed positive financial reports and letters of gratitude from patients. On his desk sat the small red Camaro the twins had tried to sell a few months ago. Maya walked in timidly. Mr. Morrison, I want you to keep this car forever. Blake frowned. But I thought you and Zoe wanted it back. We want it to stay with the man who changed everything, Maya explained seriously. It was Dad's car, and he always said we should use our treasures to help other people. You use the machine to help not just us, but everyone in this hospital. There's one condition, she continued, smiling. If you ever find other children who need help, you must remember what we taught you. A year after the meeting in the park, Blake Morrison was no longer just a CEO isolated in his ivory tower. The twins had transformed him into a man who understood that true power lay in lifting people up, not dominating markets. Diana Foster, once humiliated for daring to question injustice, was now presiding over a system-wide transformation that would benefit thousands of patients. Her courage in documenting discrimination had led to monumental change. The former Dr. Whitman discovered that prejudice is an unstable foundation for any lasting success. Her discriminatory practices, protected by bureaucracy for years, were finally facing consequences commensurate with their damage. Twins Maya and Zoe learned that true kindness can move mountains, especially when it finds someone with the resources to turn compassion into action. As Blake watched Diana receive a national award for her achievements in healthcare equity, he held the red Camaro and reflected on how a simple act of desperate selling had rewritten everyone's destiny. The little car remained a reminder that the most transformative moments are disguised in the simplest situations. The true revenge for discrimination is not to return hate with hate, but to build a world where human dignity is the most important protocol. The best revenge for injustice is not to destroy those who caused harm, but to build a better system that makes it impossible for others to suffer in the same way. If this story touched your heart and you believe that small gestures can make a big difference, subscribe to the channel to see more stories that prove that justice, when it comes, is always worth the wait.